Hi friends, I'm so glad you're here today. I hope you had a chance to view The Crossmaker and look at that amazing story and the beautiful drawings that went along with it. Well, what I'd like to do today is walk with you through another drawing that relates to the amazing Easter story. Let's review what it is we're going to need for today's lesson. You'll need a piece of paper that is not white, that is like a medium tone, either 9 by 12 or 11 by 14. That's about as large as you want to go. A standard pencil. I'll be using a white pencil for today, but you don't need one. A great eraser. I prefer a kneaded eraser. You'll need a set of pastels, at least 12. This is a set of 24. And you'll need some fluorescent pastels. If you can find a light blue pastel, that would be great, but if you just have the basic set from the See the Light website, that's fine. If you happen to have some fluorescent color pencils, they could work too. And if you can, a little black light. If you'd like to try this, ask Mom and Dad if you can order one from the SeeTheLightShine.com website, where you can get one just this size. Now, anytime we're working with pastels, we have to make sure we stay clean. So a few things I have handy are some baby wipes, a box of tissues, and some dry paper towels. When we watched The Crossmaker, we learned about a little boy and his father who made crosses. And that one cross was very special because Jesus would be nailed to that cross and die for our sins. But that's not the rest of the story. The rest of the story is the amazing story of Easter, the resurrection. And that's what we're going to focus on today in our special drawing. Now, what did artists think of the resurrection all through history? Well, let's take a look at two pieces of art. This first one is by the artist Heinrich Hoffmann. And you'll see Jesus has risen out of the tomb, and the guards are struck down because of the glory and brightness of Jesus. Now, this next painting is by Matthias Grunwald. It shows Jesus actually lifted into the air when he's risen. In fact, you can even see the nail holes in his hands and his feet. Again, the guards are struck down. But what's missing from both of these paintings? Well, that's the part we're going to work on today, and it's found in Matthew 28. So let me read it in the Bible. Matthew 28, starting at verse 1, it says, "After the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down then from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were as white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, 'Do not be afraid, for I know who you are looking for, Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He is risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay, and then go quickly and tell his disciples. He has risen from the dead, and he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as I've told you.' And the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and they ran to tell the disciples." Well, that's the part of the story that we're going to be drawing today. The part where the angel rolls away the stone from the mouth of the tomb and sits on it, waiting to surprise the women when they come to anoint Jesus' body with spices. There's a great part in there that talks about how the angel appeared like lightning. And that gives us an opportunity to use some very special pastels for this story. So let's get started. So you're going to take your paper and you're going to put it up vertically. That means long ways. And remember, when we talked about the grounds, that's background, middle ground, and foreground, we're going to do the same thing with this drawing. Now, you're going to use a standard pencil, but so it shows up a little better, I'm going to use a white pencil. I don't want to make really dark lines. They'll show through the pastel. You keep your lines nice and light with your regular pencil. I will use white. So about halfway up on your page, you're going to make kind of a wavy line that's going to be separating our foreground from our middle ground and background. Kind of a bumpy line. The ground's not always very flat. In order to make the tomb area Okay, about halfway up in this top half, again, another wavy line, but this one is going to have a bump to the left and slope down to the right, like that. Here's where we'll make the mouth of the cave. This is the tomb. When they buried back in Bible times, they didn't do it down in the earth like we do here, because land was so valuable, they needed it for crops and orchards. So when they had rocky places that could not be used to grow anything, and no grass grew out of it for the sheep or the cattle, they would often carve places in there, and that would be the tomb for burying people. So it wasn't down in the ground, it was kind of in a sunken rocky cave. Now, next to this opening of our tomb, we need to make the stone that was rolled away. Of course, it has to be bigger than the opening. So right over here, next to it, not quite round, kind of more bumpy, sort of roundish but bumpy, we're going to make the stone, larger than the opening. Now, in our background, we want to show some hills in the background. Jerusalem is a very hilly part of the Middle East. And so we're going to start over here and make a line that goes up, dips down, and dips back up again. Just kind of a subtle, not too bumpy and rocky because it's way in the distance, so it's a much smoother line. In this little dip right here, we're going to start another hill that's way off in the distance. So now we have the basic lines for our background and our middle ground, and now we've got to work on our foreground. That's what's closest to us. Coming out of this mouth of the tomb, this is this cave that's going to be the tomb, take your pencil and very lightly draw a strong diagonal line. Start right here at the opening of the tomb, but make it a little jagged. Now, this is going to be the start of our path. The other side of the opening of the tomb, again, a little jagged, coming all the way around, almost a horizontal line, just slightly, and it goes off the page. But the path wraps around, and as we remember, anything that's coming towards us in the foreground is going to get larger. It recedes and gets smaller in the background, but will be larger in the foreground. So our path is now winding back around. Keep that line jagged, and you're switching back, coming in this direction. This is the wide path, and the women are now heading towards the tomb on this path. They're closer to us, so they're going to be much larger. And the figures of the women are actually going to go off the page. So about halfway up in this bottom section, our foreground section, this is your horizon line, you're going to make what looks like a very long upside down U. And that's going to be the veil on the one woman. We're seeing them from the back. Now, you remember in Scripture it says, after the Sabbath ended. But these women, because the nighttime of Saturday would have been over, would probably still be in their head coverings because the Sabbath has just ended. Let's make the woman next to her, where again, another upside down U, a very long upside down U to show the veil. And she's a little shorter than her friend, just for interest. Now the shoulders will peek out of the robe. We wouldn't see very much. Women covered themselves up pretty well. Number one, from the heat and the sun, also for modesty. So we'll have long sleeves. There's her elbow, and she's holding some bundles of cloths because they were going to anoint Jesus' body with spices. So she has a bundle in her arms. So all you see from the back, you don't see any faces. You see the back head veil of this woman and the back head veil of this woman and the backs of their bodies right next to each other, and they're walking on the path. So let's finish our path over in this little corner, just another kind of jagged line. So now we have the basic framework for our pastel drawing. Now, friends, if your lines are kind of dark, take the time right now, grab your eraser and lighten up those lines. You don't want any really dark pencil lines to come through your pastel. You'd rather that the drawing really be the pastel. I'm just going to go through, even though this is white pencil, I'm just going to go through and lighten up some of my lines so that my pastel comes through. So are you ready to work with pastel? We have a couple of rules whenever we work with chalk pastel because it is very dusty, very dirty. We always start off with a shirt over top of our clothes or wear an old shirt so that you don't get anything messed up. So I'm going to put on my work shirt now. Okay, so now we're ready. I've covered up. I make sure my sleeves are rolled up away from my hands. I don't drag my sleeves through my pastel. So push up your sleeves if you need to, or wear something short. I also want to make sure I have my baby wipes ready. One of the things we do when we're working with pastels is we use our fingers a lot for blending, but they can get really dirty. We always want to keep them clean so it keeps our drawing colors fresh. We'll be using some tissues for some blending. And the paper towels are here just to make sure my hands are dry. After I use a baby wipe, they're going to be moist, but we never put wet or moist fingers onto pastels or paper. When we're working with pastels, we always work from the background to the foreground. That's especially important right now as I'm working, since I'm on an easel and the chalk dust is going to fall down. If you're working on a flat surface like a desk or a table, every once in a while you're going to want to pick up your paper and tap it onto your table so that the chalk dust can fall down. Never rub it. Never use your arm to get rid of chalk dust. Just tap. So we're starting in our background, and that's going to be sky. So grab a bluish pastel, whatever shade you like. We're going to use the side of our pastel to fill in this color, so I'm just going to break my pastel. They're meant to be broken. And using the side of my pastel, very quickly, I'm going to put in some color. Now you notice I didn't spend a lot of time. It went in very quick because now I'm going to go back with my finger and I'm going to blend this blue. I'm going right down to that hill line I drew. Great. Now I can go back in and add in some clouds with a white pastel if I like. That's really something you would do at the very end, like a finishing touch. Right now we just want to get the basic colors in. So here's my hills. They're off in the distance. I'm not going to see a lot of detail on the hills, but they're important to our story. I'm going to be using a purplish color, a darker purple. Again, I'm going to break my stick because I want to use the side of my pastel. But how do I show the different hills? We learned when we talk about things receding in the distance that the further away it is, the lighter it is, then the color is duller. So I'm just going to put in a nice light layer of this purple. I'm going to cross over my white line, that's okay. So I'm actually getting all the hills right down to where I drew the stone. And for this I'm going to use a tissue. Always make sure the tissue's clean because I actually want to control how much pastel I pick up off the paper. So when you're using a tissue or a rag, you actually are pulling up some of that pastel you just put down. So you're going to be careful. We don't want to press too hard. And I'm making a nice soft purple across all of these hills. But I want the hills that are closer to look darker. So I'm going to grab my pastel again, and this time I'm going to use the edge of my pastel, not the full side. And I'm going to go back in, going right over that line again. Then take the side of my pastel and kind of make the dark kind of blend in with the light right on that edge, right there. So use your finger to kind of blend where it's darker to where it becomes lighter. So the distant hill is a lighter shade of purple than the hills that are in front of it. You see that? Now we're ready to move on to the middle ground, but my fingers are dirty. So first, I've got to make sure I'm clean. You do the same thing. Make sure your fingers are nice and clean and dry before we move on to the next step. So now I'll take a paper towel, make sure I'm dry, and I'm good to go. For this middle ground, this is where we have the rocks that were carved into for the tomb. So take 3 shades of brown. Let's take a really dark brown, a medium brown, and something that's more like a light tannish color, like that. That's what we're going to work with to do our rocks. We're going to start with our medium tone. I'm going to break my pastel, and I'm going to cover the entire area, even the opening, the stone that was rolled away, the main part of the cave, and the cave opening. I'm going to go over the whole thing. Now you can see my white lines showing up. That's why I wanted you, friends, to make sure your pencil lines were light, because it will show through. So now once I have this, I'm going to go back and I'm going to use my finger to blend it in so it's kind of a little more even over the whole thing. Now that we've done the blending with the medium tone, using a combination of the dark and the light and the edge of the pastels, we're going to create the illusion that this is a rocky surface. So this hill, we're imagining, goes back, and so we think it would probably be darker towards the top. So using the edge of your pastel, make some kind of diagonal marks, almost like little squares, towards the top. And this time you're only going to blend in a little bit, not all the way. Around the opening, some darker marks. It would have taken stonemasons a while to carve a big hole out of a hill like this to make the opening. So around that opening, coming back over to the rock face, make some dark marks. This corner over here is further away and it's behind the rolled stone, so let's make some dark marks over here. And along the top of this line, we're going to make some dark marks, but we're not going to do blending. We're just going to kind of make some marks. Now take your light pastel, and near where there's some dark marks, you're also going to make some light marks, kind of like with some sharp edges, using the edge of your pastel. Kind of shows rocks and crevices where things were carved out. Don't worry about the cave opening quite yet. Now the stone itself that was rolled away, we're going to add in a lot of lighter tone to show that it's nice and round, right? Add in a lot of this lighter tone in the center. Don't do any blending yet. But then around the edges, almost like you're outlining, but not quite, make some sharper, darker marks with your pastel. And we want to show that it's sitting down on the ground. So bottom here is going to be darker than anything else. Now the piece that we left out is coming. I don't want to touch the top of the stone because there's something very special at the top of that stone. Now what about that cave opening? That would be really dark. It's a hole. You're actually going to use two things. You're going to use your dark brown again and a dark purple. So using the edge of your pastel, just quickly fill in this dark opening. You don't really need to blend. And now go back with the purple. On the left side, we're going to add this purple to make it darker, but only go about halfway, and then blend in with the brown. And that makes that dark cave opening. Okay, it's time for another cleanup. I'll use this opportunity as I'm wiping my hands to kind of step back and look and see where I am so far, see what I want to add. It seems too plain in the front. If you're at a rocky cave, you probably have a lot of rocks. So, dry off my hands. Let's take our browns, and I want to add in some smaller rocks. So I can draw them with the pastel. They're going to be down further. Kind of fill that in with some scratchy marks. Take my lighter pastel, add some marks there. Might be a rock over here or two, usually darker on the bottom. medium tone, usually lighter on the top. And so there's some other rocks in that area besides the giant one that was rolled away. Okay, I'm going to take a tissue. I'm going to very carefully brush under there so I can see where I'm going to do my foreground. Now my foreground is simply a field. This was a rocky area. It's probably a field headed towards with a path towards where the women were coming from their town. This is already, my paper's already a medium tone green. You can use gray or blue or whatever you have. I'm going to take some green and I'm just going to fill in, but I'm going to avoid the women and I'm going to avoid the path. And I'm just doing it quickly so I can get in a quick layer, and I'll use my fingers to blend. So it's like a lighter greenish color, right up to the women, right up to the path. I'm going to go back in with the exact same pastel and make it a little darker as it comes to the front. Right? It gets lighter as it recedes, but it's darker in the foreground. This was not a field like for grazing of sheep, so it's not going to be very even. It's going to be kind of mottled. Now I'm going to take another yellowish beige color. This is going to be my path. You can imagine if it's grass that's been worn away where you can see the dirt underneath. And again, it's not going to be very solid. So I'm going to make lines that go straight across, little thin lines using the edge of my pastel, kind of in the middle of this field, and just very lightly go back in with my fingers. Take a brown and very lightly add in on the edges some very light marks, just to show kind of this worn path. Almost like little tiny whispery lines going across. Now let's continue our path down towards where the women are. Stop when you get to your very light outline of the women. It's this beige yellow color. And I'm going to take the green I used for the field, and I'm going to almost outline the path, that jagged line we drew, so I can see it a little more distinctively. And then use the brown right next to it, very light lines going across, and blend those in. Continue the road beyond the women. You can see it's like a goldish color. And I want to go back with the green pastel, do that jagged outline a little stronger, and then go back in with some light brown. And I'll use my ring finger, because it's the same colors. I'm not changing colors, so it's okay. My finger was a little dirty from before, but I'm using the exact same color, so that's fine for blending. And there's our path. Now you can go back in and add pebbles and ruts in the road. Those are all finer details that you do at the very end when all the rest of your pastels are done. So I'm finished with that. Time to clean my hands. Now let's work on the women. We see the back of the women. Let's just decide that one woman will be in blue and the other will be in pinks. Just for some variety, our composition has a lot of earth tones in it right now. So I want to make sure my hands are dry. So I'm going to use 2 shades of blue, and that will be our first woman. She'll have on a light blue veil, so using the side of your pastel, very gently fill in that really long U shape you made. That's the back of her veil. Great, see, it didn't take a lot of time. Pastels work very quickly. And now her robe is going to be the darker blue. So very carefully, I just see her shoulder and then the sleeve of her robe. And I'm making the strokes heading down towards the bottom of the page. See a little bit of her robe under her veil and then a tiny bit of her dress. Now if I wanted to show some folds of fabric, one of the things I can do is take our white pastel and very lightly, friends, just very lightly, make some long strokes from the bottom, just about halfway up, just very lightly, can show some folds in her veil. Now for her friend that's with her, we're going to use a different color, and we're going to use 2 shades of pink. This is more like a magenta, and then a lighter pink. So let's make her veil the darker, and we'll take this magenta color, and the same thing, we're just going to fill in this nice long U shape with the side strokes of our pastel. Make sure I have a clean finger. My pinky finger's clean, so I'm going to blend that in. Perfect. Now it's time for her robe. So I'm going to use the lighter pink. It's going to go right off the bottom. You just simply see the back of her robe. There's her arm. She's holding a bundle of cloths. Carefully blend. And I would imagine that the cloths they were going to anoint Jesus' body with the spices were white, so I'm just going to go back and make the bundle in her arms like a white bunch of cloth. And so now you see the back of the women heading up the path. So if I want to show a few folds perhaps in her veil, I'll just make a light white line, practically just whispering like that. And now you can see the folds in the fabric. Important piece is missing, isn't it? So now it's time to put our angel that was on top of the stone. Do you remember what it says in Scripture? It says his face was like lightning. So one of the first things we learn already is that this is a he. The second thing is that he must have glowed amazingly bright because it says he was like lightning, probably even hard to look at. And we know we want to put this angel right on the top of the stone. So how do we start? Well, I'm going to be using this very light blue pastel because this is a fluorescent pastel. Now, there's a white pastel, my friends. It's really only for grown-ups to use. That's for showing in black light. But if you have this very light blue, if you can find that, that'll show up nice and bright. The idea is that he was like lightning. And so how do you even start to get a big angel sitting on the stone? Well, he's sitting and he's in his beautiful white robe. So let's start with arms out wide. So we're just going to do a vertical line first, coming down, almost like a T, like a letter T, and then horizontal lines going across like the arms outstretched, like a big T. Now curve at the bottom of the T as if he's sitting, and spread this out wide. The robe is down over the stone. He's kind of see-through. We have no idea what angels look like. Have you ever seen an angel? I haven't. Scripture talks about them in several places. Now spread out so that if the sleeve is out wide on both sides, like this. So there's the robe of our angel up on the stone. Now take your orange fluorescent pastel, and we're going to make an oval for the angel's face, but we're going to fill it in. Friends, we probably would not be able to see the features of the angel because he glowed so much. He was like lightning. So it would be indescript. You would not see the features. Coming out of the sleeves, you would have the hands outstretched, announcing the great news. He is not here. He is risen. Coming out of the bottom of the robe, you would have the feet. Remember, that angel is sitting up on top of a giant rock. He was probably larger than any human that we'd seen. And then you can use your red pastel for the angel's hair. We have no idea, but we do know that he looked like lightning. So I'm guessing that that angel had a pretty amazing appearance. Who knows what kind of hair it was? And the angel is up on that rock, waiting for the women to show up. Don't you think that's an amazing story? Wouldn't you have loved to have been there and seen the expression on the women's face when they walk up all sad after they just finished the Sabbath, missing their Savior for those few days, heading to the tomb, heavy hearts, and they see this big, lightning, light, bright, glorious creature up on a rock, shouting out to them, "Don't be afraid. I know who you're looking for, but he is not here. He is risen." That is fabulous. Now, last detail, my friends, take a black pastel, and on that distant hill, we're going to very carefully draw the 3 crosses that would have been up on that hill. The one in the center, that was the cross that Jesus died on. Next to it was the cross for the first thief, and to the right, the cross for the second thief. Way in the hills, because we do know that outside Jerusalem is where Joseph had donated the tomb to be used for Jesus' burial. So like I said, friends, you can add in some more details, but the main thing is to look at this angel. So shall we take a look at this angel and feel what those women felt when they went up to the tomb that day? Now I see the light. And now we get a glimpse of what it must have been like for those women to see this amazing angel, bright as lightning, sitting upon that stone, waiting to give the good news. He is not here. He is risen. I hope you enjoyed doing this special Easter drawing as part of the See the Light DVD. Have a blessed Easter, friends.